Hello and welcome to Soul Talk with Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel. Rabbi, with the events going on in the world, in Israel, and really the entire world right now, I think everyone's going through such a overturn of thinking, emotions, and there's a certain aspect I find myself being in such gratitude towards God for the miracles that we're experiencing right now as a nation. And I know there's been times in my life I've also gone through this on a personal level, just sensing that God is here for me, God loves me, seeing how so many different pieces and parts have to add up to create what I'd call the miracles happening in my life and our lives. And there's that side of the emotional component. But then there's the other side of the emotional component. It's that with what's going on right now in Israel with Iran, there are deaths and there is destruction and there are homeless people from what's been happening, and there's a lot of pain and fear. And in a sense, I feel like I'm going through a stage of mixed emotions when it comes to thinking about God and what's going on here. There's a part of me that just feels so in love with, appreciative, and wanting to thank God. And there's a part of me that's just sitting with so much confusion and pain and thinking about what other people are going through and how, like, why is God causing this, so to speak? So, what does one do when one is sensing this mixed emotions with God? I'd like to just be in the place of gratitude, but this other piece keeps creeping in.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're sharing that because I struggle with that too. So I'm not going to pretend that I'm the rabbi and have all the answers. And I don't have those questions. I have those questions. I have those struggles. I will only share a little bit how I address that for myself. It's very interesting that it's the Jewish people that said that God is one and that everything that's happening in the world is coming from that one mastermind. But I could understand why there was a whole culture that believed that there were many gods, or at least two, the God of darkness, the God of light, because this doesn't seem to be coming from the same God. We're witnessing phenomenal miracles happening. I mean, historic events that are biblically, dimensions of the biblical times, like something really shocking is going on and something very messianic appears to be happening. And yet it's still happening. Missiles hitting. And look, I was this Shabbat with my grandchildren in a bomb shelter, and it was very painful to see the stress that they're going through and the trauma I'm sure they're going to have to carry through in their lives because of all this. And you kind of wonder, maybe there isn't one God. Maybe there are two gods. Maybe there's the God of darkness and the God of light. There's the God of goodness and the God of bad. But no, Judaism absolutely insists that God is one and there's not two domains or two different, powers at struggle with each other, but there's really only one power. You might say the unified field theory was way back the Jewish idea that there's only oneness and absolutely oneness. And yet, how can we put these two opposites together? Well, I don't think we can with our logical, rational minds. It doesn't go together at all. We don't see that. How can all this miracle and all this pain be happening at the same time? How can we have this celebration and yet all this, sadness at the same time? And we don't know. And, it's a dangerous thing for me to say, and I'm going to say it, but I'm gonna qualify it many, many times that all this amazing, phenomenal miracles are happening really started with October 7th. And who would ever thought at something that was so devastating and so painful and so terrible would actually be the seed of something so phenomenal and so messianic and so literally historical and world changing, global shifting. Who could see that there could be any good coming out of all this bad? And I'm not saying this is worth the price. I'm not saying that at all, and I'm going to repeat that. I'm not saying that's worth the price. It always bothered me when being a son of a survivor and very, very very fixated on the pain and the tragedy and the potential sadness, the great sadness. And when someone would say to me, well, out of the Holocaust came the state of Israel, I don't like that answer. I don't think it's an answer, although it is true that it did precipitate some ball rolling that snowballed into something like this, which was messianic. But still, I'm not going to look back and I'm not ready to say, well, it was worth the price. It's not for me to say that. God can decide whatever he decides, and he does. But, whenever we make a bracha on food, we say, Shakol niyeh bidvaro, all is by his word, and we mean it. Everything is by his word. And yet, this phenomenal military accomplishment is only by the hand of God. And yet these missiles and where they land and who gets hurt and how much they get hurt and all that is by the word of God. And in simple language, I don't know. I don't know. I can only say that one of my teachers said, if there is a God, suffering makes no sense. But if there isn't a God, nothing makes any sense. And yeah, I can't make sense of the suffering, but that doesn't diminish from me the incredible excitement and the joy of seeing something really phenomenal happening for the future of the Jewish people and the world. I think we are heading towards peace in the Middle East, but there's still going to be a price to pay.
There's something so powerful about an image you gave me as you were speaking. You spoke about October 7th being the seeds for these messianic times. And I'm thinking when you plant a seed in the ground, it has to rot before new growth happens. It's almost as if it dies. There's almost like a decomposition. And so visually, or if we were watching the seed, it almost looks like far from new life coming from it. It looks like it's sort of the end. And yet and it's also buried under the ground, which also looks like it's the end. And I'm just wondering, just that image that you specifically used, the idea of planting seeds, and that was definitely October 7th as a time that did feel like this cutting off, this death, this being buried under, this not being able to see any light coming from such darkness. And yet that really is what happens with the seed. But after that process is where all the growth comes. And to an extent, the idea that even within a relatively short amount of time, we're starting to see some of that coming out, some of that light coming out of this darkness is really a gift, because it doesn't always happen that we see where light comes out of darkness.
Right. We describe the messianic time and we describe salvation, Yeshua, as matzmiach Yeshua, that Hashem causes the growing of Yeshua. Yeshua is described like a plant, as something that's growing. And yet, again, it makes me feel happy, but I still feel sad because there's still hostages that are being held in terror dungeons, and the interesting thing about the Jewish people is we can have in our hearts joy and deep sadness at the same time. And there's an amazing amount of joy. Something really exceptional has happened in the last 24 hours, maybe a little bit more at this point. And yet it's very sad, very, very sad what's going on, and it's and it is scary on the other hand too, like every time. Last night it was at 3 o'clock in the morning. We got an alert. I wake up my wife, and we're ready to run down to the bomb shelter. We don't have one in our apartment. We have one underneath our apartment building. And you go in there, and your heart is racing, and it's a time to surrender. It's the time to say, okay, God, you run the world. You know what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. And but we've talked about this before. Asking why doesn't help, and we're not going to get that answer. Not in this world. But we should ask what? What do I do in this situation, and how can I contribute to making it the best and learning from it the most?
That's so important. You're really helping me realize something. I think the idea of being able to hold both appreciation, joy, and also sadness and fear, it sounds like to a degree, and also this perspective, a tremendous appreciation for God, but we can also hold that with the I don't understand what's going on, God. It doesn't have to cancel each other out. And maybe that's part of my challenge, and maybe many of our challenges, is that I feel like I've been having a conflict about this. It almost seems as though when I'm struggling with what's going on, it almost takes away from my appreciation of the gifts of what it's going on. And maybe part of this, as you're sharing and you're helping me understand, is I can hold both and stop fighting with myself. There doesn't need to be a conflict about it.
Right. You don't have to think about them at the same time. We all know that when our child is born, it is in one of the most joyous moments of our lives, but in the back of our heads, we know he's going to die. We don't know if we're going to be there to witness that. It's very likely that we won't. And God willing, our baby will have a very long life that goes well beyond our own. But we don't think about it. And so when it's time to cry, we cry. And when it's time to dance and sing, we dance and sing. And we shouldn't let one diminish the validity of the other.
Wow, that really actually reminds me, I think, the wisdom of King Solomon. There's a time for everything. And that's actually such wisdom as I'm even thinking on this topic, is knowing when the time to for each piece, for each part, for each of our emotions, for whatever it is that when you also said, what can I do in this situation? Not why is this happening? Even asking for, where I'm at right now to give place and knowing where and when to give the place for each experience based on what's happening right now.
Right. I once shared in a conversation that we had that when my mother passed away and I was in the period of mourning, people were coming to visit you at the Shiva house. And I remember I was lying in bed and I suddenly realized that in a weird way, as sad as I am, I feel this very deep sense of joy that I know how to be sad and that I'm sad for the right reasons. And it's a very different understanding of joy. It's not, people think joy is you're singing, you're dancing, you're joking, you're laughing, whatever. But a much more profound joy, which is an inner joy, is that I'm in line with what I'm feeling. I'm validating my feelings. I'm growing through what I'm going through. And there's a deep sense of joy to be sad when you should be sad. And you know how to express that sadness and embrace that sadness and let it do its work.
Wow, I so appreciate you sharing that because it really highlights what I'm starting to understand is I think some of the challenge that we bring upon ourselves in this struggle that I'm bringing out to you is that we don't accept it. We think there's something wrong with it. And when I can accept that it's okay, the surrender to God, recognize that as a human being, I will go through lots of different experiences, and my capacity for understanding how to put all these pieces together is limited. But instead of struggling with it, again, surrender, accept. And that just puts off the pressure that I think I'm putting on myself of how can it be? Is this, but this point of God is one. It's just hard for our minds to comprehend what this oneness means when we have so many different perspectives of understanding.
Well, it's like an ant walking across a painting, and it comes across something very, very dark, and then it comes across something very, very light, and someone says to you, the world is really beautiful, and he can't put that together. There's these dark times, and there's these bright, happy times. But if the ant suddenly grows wings and flies above and sees, oh my gosh, this is a picture, and that the dark lines and the dark colors actually gave the bright colors their brightness and their glow. But we're not there. We're right now walking across the painting in this linear sense, and we don't have that zoom, take a look from above picture. And that's what's going to happen when we leave this world. We're going to zoom out and see that what we piece together, black lines, dark lines, purple, and yet orange, yet yellow, and it all just didn't seem to come together. And then we'll pull together and realize, my gosh, it was all one. It was all beautiful and only beautiful.
Now, I have to say that really helps me because I recognize that when it comes to real life situations, I may not really be able to see what this picture is. We're in it, but just understanding that when I'm going through a challenging time, or where as a nation going through any pieces and parts of challenges, it's that again this image is almost too close and we're too limited to see the whole picture. And so it makes sense that feels dark because this is dark and it's a part, but we don't have the context and the perspective to understand how even what appears to be darkness is actually still it's one. God is one. It's still a part of that light in some way, and almost it sounds like you're saying necessary for that light to the lighter parts to show up.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. The darkness, we will, in perfect 2020 hindsight, will realize that it actually contributed to make the bright even brighter.
So, in a certain sense, what you're really sharing here is that we actually need the without, and I'm thinking about it in life, everything's contrast. There's no tall without short. There's no good. If everything's good, then what does good even mean? In a certain sense, I'm realizing in other aspects of life too, an act of goodness is because it's in comparison to the opposite, right? An act of giving is compared to maybe an act of taking. Those things don't mean so much without having that contrasting experience.
Look, if you were born wealthy and you grew up in a community that's wealthy and you only watch TV shows about wealthy people, you wouldn't know you're wealthy because you've never seen poverty. And I remember Kirk Douglas, who I had some opportunity to learn some Torah with. I remember he once saying to me that he gave his children everything, but the one gift his parents gave him, he couldn't give his children, which was the gift of poverty. And that really, because he had the gift of poverty, he sits in his home in Beverly Hills and really, really appreciates what he has. But he doesn't feel he was able to give that to his children because they grew up in wealth and they never really experienced poverty. So it's not, it's not enough to just know about poverty. It's like literally facing it and experiencing it personally sets the stage for and creates the contrast for an incredible sense of gratitude of what you do have.
This is so helpful because, in addition to the idea of maybe dropping the struggle, I'll call it, it's also giving perspective on the struggle, recognizing that it might feel bad, but even what feels bad, there is a purpose to it. And there might even be what we call something good that I just can't comprehend right now in it. And just knowing that, even on a theoretical level, I think really does change one's approach, perspective, and processing of what does feel bad. Meaning, I have to acknowledge if it feels bad, it feels bad. I don't have to be hard on myself saying, God is only good, so why am I upset? There's something wrong with me. No, I'm a human being, and it makes sense with my understanding of what's going on. I'm going to not, have struggle with this. But at the same time, in a theoretical realm, recognizing that there is good even when what feels bad, it changes the way I process and internalize the harsher experiences.
It's what I heard. It's one put, you have to give yourself permission to be human. God not only gave us permission to be human, he created us human. He wired us. We are hardwired for these sad feelings, these down moments. And we shouldn't feel like, oh my gosh, if I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling challenged, that somehow a damage to my faith and gratitude. No, I am incredibly grateful, but I'm in pain.
And that goes back to, again, being able to hold both. And I think even if we're not consciously aware of it, and I can, invite anyone hearing at this conversation to sort of examine that within themselves, but I see within myself that I think not being able to accept that it's okay doesn't, right, almost thinking that maybe there's something wrong with my faith in God, and that holding on to that actually creates all this tension. But what you're offering here is that you don't have to hold on. You can hold both, and it doesn't have to create tension. But it's a whole different experience than of going through a challenging experience or the questioning or the struggle when it's not holding all that tension. It just is, and we can just give a place for it. And I really want to thank you for giving that space and of understanding of where it fits in. So this definitely gives a tremendously new insight and understanding for myself in terms of that it's human what I'm going through, what you're going through. I appreciate you shared that too, Rabbi, of this struggle of really struggling sometimes, God, what's going on? And then another moment, oh my goodness, God, thank you for these miracles. And I so see that you're here in this picture. And the next moment, where is God? How could this be happening? This is human. And the important thing is to recognize as human beings, this is part of how we're wired. We can still hold on to faith. We can still hold on to God. It doesn't mean we don't have struggles. Give yourself permission to hold both. And that will really give us, I think, at least for myself, frees me up to really go through what we're going through right now and still being able to see the light and recognizing that the darkness itself does have purpose. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora